discussion. This is Mary, this is Morgan, and this is Tyler, and today our general topic of discussion is epistemology. A little bit of our background research includes us watching the video titled Philosophical Reasoning, How to Argue, and then we read a reading by Watson called The Trouble with Expertise, and then finally we took a quiz also on the trouble with expertise. So the Google definition of epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. So the research that we did for this project starts with Mary. She went in depth to research a little bit of the history and discovery of epistemology. Then she goes into some different philosophers and their approaches to the topic and ends with more recent information, how it affects our world today. Then we move on to Morgan, who takes on task 3 and basically summarizes what expertise is based off of the Watson reading and her own notes. And finally, Tyler ends with some outside research of a concept called knowledge how.
Okay, so once again, I'm Mary, and I'll be talking about epistemology, and all the information I got was from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So epistemology is the study of knowledge. The term epistemology comes from the Greek words episteme and logos. Episteme can be translated as knowledge, understanding, acquaintance, and logos can be translated as account, argument, or reason. Although the term epistemology is not that old itself, it goes way back into any known philosophy in our world. And some philosophers, I'll mention some, so there's Plato. His epistemology was an attempt to understand what it was to know and how knowledge is good for the person that knows it. And then John Locke's epistemology was an attempt to understand the operations of human understanding. So Plato, in comparison to Plato, Plato's was just to know, and John Locke's was more about humans specifically. And then Immanuel Kant's epistemology was an attempt to understand the conditions of the possibility of human understanding. So each step so far has gone more in depth than the other one. And then Bertrand Russell's epistemology was an attempt to understand how modern science could be justified by appeal to sensory experience. So he tied in he didn't just have the philosophy of it, he had science and how our actual world affects it as well. And then recent work in formal epistemology was an attempt to understand how what we know and what our confidence is and how we use our evidence to use our knowledge. And then recent work in feminist epistemology is an attempt to understand the ways in which our interests affect our evidence and affect our rational constraints more generally. So the feminist work is more general, while the other work in formal epistemology is more detailed. And in all these cases, the epistemologists or the philosophers, they seek to understand one or another kind of knowledge, which could be it's all cognitive, so it's success or failure. And epistemologists concern themselves with several texts, which are sorted into 2 different categories. There's the nature of knowledge, which is just knowing what knowledge is and understanding what it is and how to distinguish between when someone knows something and when they don't. And then the extent of human knowledge, which is just how much we can know. And then there's the empirical, which is our sensational knowledge. So if you see something or hear something, we know that we see or hear it. And then there's rational, which is if someone teaches us something or anything like that, we have reason behind it.
Okay, so I am gonna summarize The Trouble with Expertise, which is the reading that we did by Watson. So it pretty much delves into the fact, or the question of why we should trust experts and the difficulty in trusting experts, and breaks it down in a pretty easy way. So it examines how expertise itself is unproblematic, but experts themselves can manipulate their power, and that's the premise of the reading. So it kind of starts with Watson discussing relationships you can have with an expert. So that could be a personal relationship, whether that is your mom is a doctor, you know her generally, you trust her generally, and therefore the expert is easy to trust. He also gave the example of stranger at a bar, where you're sitting at a bar and just talking to a stranger about a general topic. You might be a little more skeptical, you don't know them personally, you don't know their credentials, that kind of thing. And then there's another option, some more recent, which is a TV personality or someone who's generally well known. An example of that could be Dr. Oz or Dr. Phil. and they're more skeptical, but for different reasons, because you don't know where they're getting funding. They could have underlying motivations. Stranger to bar might not have underlying motivations, but this expert could, because they could be receiving money or getting paid to say certain things, which has been seen in the past. But generally we do trust experts because they know more than others, because they know more than us, but a lot of times there's an issue with blind faith and expertise, which is why we have to examine, what are they saying, what's qualifying them to be experts. So Watson pretty much challenges the claim that experts know more, and it is not that they know more, it's that they know how. So this kind of gets into that topic of knowledge that versus the knowledge how. And so that's tacit knowledge, which is, you can't teach it or explain it, but you know how to do it. So you can be a really good hockey player, but you might not be able to coach hockey. And explicit know-how is be able to explain how something is done. So you're a good hockey player and you're a good coach. So you have that little more knowledge there because you can explain it and break it down to someone. It's not just, implicit in yourself. And then there kind of goes down to this thing of expert guesses, which is common in the medical field, where we're like, we can diagnose you with this, we're gonna see if this works, but we're not quite sure if it's gonna work yet. So that experts don't even necessarily know all the time, so that kind of buys into the fact that you can't have blind faith in experts because they aren't also always experts. And then there is a discussion of competency, which is, in the broad sense, the ability to do something is the ability to be able to do something, which most people are competent, and then it kind of goes into this discussion of levels of competency and a wide range of competency, where you can know how to do one task for a field versus 10 tasks for a field, that kind of thing. And then that's pretty much just kind of, leading into expertise, that experts are more competent than others. So that's how you can define experts. They're more competent than those surrounding them. So that could be a toxicologist is really competent in the field of toxicology, which is the example that Watson gave, but they might not be competent in the field of, asteroids or space or things like that. And there's an expertise range of what competency could be. So competency in first aid is a lot lower than competency for brain surgery, right? So there's that wide range of how many people can be experts on something or how many people can be competent in something. And the real problem Watson kind of gets into to wrap up the reading is not with expertise itself, it's how experts behave. So if an expert is taking, like I said, funding, a TV personality, for example, is taking funding from, an outside source to be saying certain things, or a medical professional is getting paid or bribed to say false information. We've seen that with cigarettes and them saying it doesn't cause lung cancer and that sort of thing in the early 20th century. So it's not the problem with the fact that people know more, it's how they choose to behave with that information.
Right. And then I did a little bit of outside knowledge on knowledge how. I used the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and I got a couple examples from there kind of explaining it. So to start off, there's just 3 types of knowledge that we should be able to distinguish between. There's acquaintance knowledge, knowledge that, and knowledge how. Basically, knowledge how is knowing how to do something. And what I mean by this is basically knowing how you do an action or how to get an answer. So one example of this is the Brownstein and Michelson example. And this example is about a ball player catching a ball. So ball players know how to catch the ball, but there's certain things when they are going to catch it that they don't realize they're doing. So this would be making rapid eye movements to through the path of the ball. But when you ask them afterwards, they would say they were tracking the ball the entire time. And so this leads to some false beliefs and true beliefs about them catching the ball. They know the path they're going and they know why they're going there, but they didn't realize that they weren't tracking it the entire time, but they were rapidly moving their eyes. So this example is mostly disagreed with by philosophers. So I'm going to give another example without the false belief. So this example is about a ball player called Athena. And in this example, every time Athena goes to catch a ball, she uses the same method every time. So she knows exactly what she's going to do, and everything is intentional. This is showing that Athena takes a certain set of steps every time in order to catch the ball. So this takes away the false belief that the first example had, leaving only true beliefs. So this shows that knowledge how is knowing how you are something, and knowing every intentional step that you take to accomplish what you're trying to do. And the two examples I gave, it's knowing how to catch a ball.
So now we're gonna move on to like the free-flowing part of the discussion, and we're gonna start with epistemology. So what I would like to talk about is like, when I was talking about how knowledge like kind of like moved on with philosophers out of time, and like I kind of want to ask like you guys, like where do you think the views of knowledge in terms of philosophy, like where do you think it's going, like knowledge, like epistemology, like where is it, like I have no idea where it's going, but I would just want other opinions, because like it got so detailed as you kept going down the line of philosophers. So how detailed can we really get?
I agree with you that I don't know either, and I think like just like what you said, it keeps adding on. I think over time we'll find out more stuff. I think it's like a kind of a ever so expanding topic. I always think there's gonna be like, if we discover like a fact, then there's always gonna be a contradiction, and then it's gonna change. Like there's always gonna be something that doesn't directly align with that fact. So I think that's why it's like such a tricky thing, and then we're gonna get more philosophers added to the list. Like as more people, get degrees in study, then I think we'll just keep gaining more information, which is kind of a good thing in a lot of fields, and we'll have a lot more answers. But will we really? Because then we're just gonna challenge all those beliefs. So I really think it's just like a big, never-ending cycle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I think knowledge is meant to be constantly expanded on, and like when you can look at even taking it outside of just philosophers in general, you can look at like expertise in the real world. Like a dentist 100 years ago would not be considered an expert today by any stretch, and expertise is always going to evolve based on knowledge. So I think that we can just take it for the time period that it's in, and I think that's what we have to focus on, like the relevancy of the knowledge in the period that it's in, and how, that's going to always change, right? Doctors that have been in the field for 50 years they started off with different information than they developed, right? You see certain professors, like I have a professor that, had a master's degree but went back to school because he had to get recertified on something because the field changed. So you have examples like that in the real world, so that's gonna change based on what becomes available. And I think availability is really the key here with how epistemology is going to change. I'm not sure.
So as I was doing research, I really found there was a lot of different types of knowledge, like not just the three I mentioned earlier, but certain knowledges that have to do with certain fields as well, like knowledge for religion, and so just knowledge in general will change just based off of what you're talking about. So.
Yeah, I agree with like all you guys. Like I think especially what you said about how like your professor had to go back, and like that just shows how much like knowledge in a specific like expert area, like it could change, and like it alters a lot of different things. Like how like that was only one example, but how many other people had to go back,
Right.
and like it altered their life. So like us finding out more and more is like really changing like how we perceive the world and how people are, like how it's affecting people too. And so like tying more into like experts, like when Morgan talked about experts, like I was just like thinking while she was talking, I was like, what determines someone like an actual expert in something? Like yes, like they studied and like they went to school and they got their degrees and they're in their job and they're doing stuff, but like there's so much we don't know that they also don't know. So like, yeah, they know more than me, so I think they're an expert, but like there's so much more that they don't know. Like in the medical field, there's so much we don't know. And yeah, like we have the experts that like know, like anesthesiologists or surgeons, like literally neurosurgeons. Like they know so much, but like there's only so much that they know. So like how far does this like expert go beyond what we already know?
What I would say with that is, I think it kind of starts with the ability to measure, or not even measure, just see if an expert or someone who claims to be an expert is able to make a definitive and like measurable impact in the field that they're in. So a doctor can go to medical school all they want, right? They can pass medical school, they can pass the MCAT, all of those credentials, right? But then they go to do a surgery and they botch it. Okay, so then you're screwing that up. But you go to do a surgery and you get results that were unprecedented because of how well it went and your attention to detail, right? right? So that expertise is measured by the ability to make an impact in that field. So I think expertise that it wasn't really touched on by Watson. This is just something that I've always kind of thought that it's measured by an ability to make an impact. So even a professor, right? They have a PhD in something, or they have extensive business experience from the business school. So they're able to make an impact on students by educating them about a field or helping students get job opportunities because they're good at what they do. And I mean, this goodness is measured by the fact that they're able to propel other people forward, propel things in the field forward.
All right. The way I think of an expert is I think of an expert as someone who's able to completely teach you something. Like they'll be able to teach it to you with no mistakes, so you'll be able to do the same thing. So an example, since I'm in computer engineering, I would want a professor who would be an expert in coding so that they'll teach me everything they know so that I can also do it with no mistakes and I'll be able to know exactly what I need to do for all of my assignments and any projects I need to do in the future. So that way that I can also become an expert in that too in the future.
Yeah, I also think, specifically from the Watson reading, one of the last headings is what is the future for experts, which is kind of related to the question you said. And first sentence says it should be clear that we can't live without trusting experts. So I honestly think that's a big part of it. It's even though it's oh, is this person an actual expert? At the end of the day, I'm still gonna go to the doctor and I'm gonna trust that they know what they're doing because I have no idea. I'm not informed on the medical field. So I think it's just a part of our daily lives. And again, it's another one of those terms that's really loose because it's you could think someone's an expert and I could think, oh, I'm more of an expert, I just don't have a PhD in it. So it's again, it's another tricky thing, but basically everyone does trust them just if they think they know more than them or are more competent than them in the field because on a deeper level it could especially in the medical field, making decisions that could keep you alive or like you said, botch a surgery or something. It's they're serious things that we're putting our trust into these people, so it's we want to be able to trust them, and I think if we research beyond that, then it can get a little scary if you're oh, are we even trusting the right people? So again, it's we don't know that.
Yeah, and I was as we're wrapping it up, I just wanted to go around and say I don't know, I thought it'd be fun to go around and say something off of what Tyler said, something that we know how to do, but we necessarily don't know how to teach it. I was a cheerleader and I have had a cartwheel my entire I know how to do a cartwheel, but I do not know how to teach someone how to do a cartwheel. I don't understand how someone I just can't. I can do a million cartwheels in a row, but I just can't teach it.
A similar kind of wave of I guess athleticism. I did cheer at one point, but I did Irish dance, which is a very technical form of dance. It's very broken down. I did it for 15 years. I could not teach anyone how to do it. People oh, teach me how to Irish dance at St. Patrick's Day. Everyone wants to figure it out, right? Have a little fun moment. But breaking down something that's just been ingrained in my head for 10 years, I just can't do.
Alright, for me, I play games competitively, so it would be hard teaching someone exactly everything that goes through what I'm thinking in certain situations, especially because some of it comes down just to basic reaction and just what you're doing. So it would be hard just to teach someone exactly what to do every time the way I would do it.
Similar to you two, I did competitive dance for 12 years and I can't even remember how I was taught to do things. So I'm if I tried to teach someone, I'd probably be horrible because it's just second nature to me now.
Mm-hmm.
I also played the flute in high school and when you start, they show you each finger down that goes with the notes, and then eventually it's just muscle memory. Your fingers just go. I'm I don't even know if I can remember telling you what the fingers are because my brain just I think about it and they just go. So I don't know. That's kind of interesting.
Even something interesting, just kind of to wrap this up, building off, especially of what Tyler said, if you're playing a game competitively, that involves a lot of strategy. A lot of what the three of us did was very technical, but the strategy, I feel you can speak to this a little more. You develop some of that yourself. You might have learned some of it at some point, but some of it becomes through learning on your own. So, can expertise be qualified if you self-taught yourself information or you develop that within yourself? So I think that's just something that is a little interesting note to end on. I'm sure you were taught some and then you kind of played around own stuff up too at some point, so.
Alright, yeah, just a lot of experience would be able to get that expertise just over time.
Do we want to add the last question on task 6? Asks if the podcast was helpful in understanding the issue topic of the reading.
Oh yeah. I think this was so helpful. We were just able to say our opinions on it, and I think that really helps open up to a new view of it could alter what I think. If you say something, I'm oh, I never thought of that before, but now that I'm thinking of it, and with epistemology and experts, it all ties in because experts are experts on their subject of knowledge. So it all ties in together, and it kind of shows how much the unit connects, even though I might not have seen that before.
I would agree with that. It's just talking about it in a way that isn't just obviously I get the summary portion, but talking about it in a way that isn't just a summary of a video reading, which is obviously necessary to do, but breaking it down more into real life examples that all of us have had, I think makes it a little more interesting and relatable too, which contributes to understanding.
Right, and especially with the outside research, I probably would have never looked at it outside of just reading it by myself, but being able to do research on it really helped me learn what knowledge how is and exactly how it's in our lives.
Yeah, and my answer to the question, I agree with all of you guys. I thought it was cool to see, to expand on the topic that we talked about in class for that week, and I like the little thing that you came up with. I like hearing the personal examples and how it's really a relevant thing to everyone's life, so I thought that was interesting.
Okay, thanks for listening.